I'm going to get more money in my pocket, and we're going to save the damn planet in the process. So very cool. Thanks, Dr. Tom. We're going to have a panel discussion now to talk about and validate some of the points that Dr. Tom talked about. And I'm just going to introduce the panel moderator, Dave Rice. Not only is he a friend of mine, and I'm an admirer of his, but he is the president of the United Nations Association in Orange County. He also is the leader of a group called CIS that is conscious entrepreneurs trying to make tools and innovations that are better for our planet. He's active in Orange County politics, including in the safe closure of the San Onofre nuclear power plant. This guy is like the Energizer Bunny, and he has his hands all over the place trying to save the planet and make life better for you guys. Please help me welcome him.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Greg. First of all, I just want to reciprocate and thank Greg for his commitment to this cause and for bringing us all together. If you're like me and you've had a chance to speak to anybody at all who's here, you immediately realize how aligned we are, and that's just such a gift. So thank you, Greg, for all of that. So we're going to continue the discussion around hope for climate. With some wonderful experts also who are dedicating their lives to this space. And I want to introduce Dr. Sarwat Chowdury. She is with our United Nations Association Orange County group as well as our climate ambassador. She spent over 15 years with the United Nations working on climate issues globally. And is teaching climate at UC Irvine right now. And she's going to be giving a bit more of a global perspective on what Dr. Tom talked about with what's happening, especially around the Paris Accord and the commitments that countries have been making and all the work that's going on that we don't really get to hear enough about. And so that's important. And then Heather Beatty has a wonderful story herself she's going to share with you about, leaving corporate for a commitment to this cause and currently invests in climate solutions and looks for opportunities to have a return on investment for the climate solutions, the kinds of things that Tom was talking about. So I think, and then with that, we'll have some questions here and a chance for some discussion, and then also an opportunity to have some questions from the audience as well. So, I know we're a little bit late already on time, so we'll cut this a bit, but, certainly encourage you all to be able to reach out and be sure to meet as many folks as you can that are here, because we all need to amplify each other's work and work together. So, Dr. Chowdury.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you so much. Like Dave said, I'm Sarwat Chowdury. I grew up in Bangladesh, which is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. So all my life I've known about climate change. It's not something that's coming or in the future. This is something low-lying countries like Bangladesh are living with right now, are impacted by climate change. I wanted to show you this picture. This is actually a picture of Denali. This is the highest mountain peak in North America. I think it's about 20,000 plus feet, and federally it's called Mount McKinley, but by the local people it's called Denali, the high one. And how majestic is this, right? And I just came back from Alaska last week. So I wanted to share this beautiful picture and what we are fighting for, right? And with that, also I want to thank the organizers for starting with the kind of the art spirit acknowledgement, because in my current life, like Dave said, I teach at the UC Irvine campus, and also I'm managing a climate action program. And University of California, Irvine sits at the indigenous lands of Hashimon and Tongva people. So when we are doing this kind of discourse on climate change and environmental issues, I think it's very important to recognize, whose lands we are staying, and it's to be mindful of that, because we are all earth beings, but we are also sharing with other sentient beings, this life. So I've been working on climate change for about, like Dave said, with the United Nations over 25 years, but I started working at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., also in climate change as a graduate student. So my first publication on climate change, Bangladesh Climate Change and Sustainable Development, came out from Washington, D.C. as a gray cover report back in 2000. I was still in grad school, working on my PhD. But I mean, here we are, 2025, right? And I think for a long time, when I was asked to speak on climate, kind of a message of hope, I did want to kind of highlight that, the narrative around climate change has been negative for too long. So it's really important from my perspective that we change that narrative and we kind of look at glass half full and what are the positives. And thank you, Tom, for a very comprehensive presentation that kind of got us started. So I'm going to go to the next slide.
You want to advance the slides?
Bear with me when I'm figuring this out. Okay. Thank you. So, I was asked to talk about the Paris Agreement and the NDCs, and thank you. What are the nationally determined contribution? I won't read all of the information on the slide, you can see, but basically these are at the heart of the Paris Agreement and kind of signifies the efforts by each country to reduce their national mitigate climate change causing greenhouse gases, but also adapt to the impacts of climate change. And that means every country is requested to outline and communicate their post-2020 climate actions, the national determined contributions, every 5 years. So by kind of implication, 2025 is the year. Also, the countries are reporting on this. Okay, let's see how this works, okay? Is it me? Yeah, correct. I want to mention with the current environment and kind of, we know that U.S. moved away from the Paris Accord. As someone who grew up in a developing country, I want to highlight the steps that are being taken by developing countries in terms of climate change. Small island developed, this is SEEDS, is an acronym you'd hear a lot at the UN. So small island developing countries that are among the most affected by climate change, even though they cause less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emission. And as you can see, between 1970 and 2022, they lost an average of 2.1% of GDP due to climate disasters. And Tom was showing us how the frequency has increased, right? Once in a 500-year disaster are now predicted to be once in 5 years, right? So these small countries, they are forefront of the climate impacts, but they are also at the forefront of solutions and have made strong commitments. So you see the examples of Mauritius and Seychelles. I have had the opportunity to work in Mauritius with the UN. Wonderful country, but very climate vulnerable. And they are taking actions to reduce greenhouse gases by 40% in 2030. And move from energy to green sources. So let's move on to the next one. Yeah. So the COP, thank you, Tom, for introducing the COP. So next COP is going to be happening in Belém and Brazil in November, right? So when I was working for the UN in my previous career, every year I would be going to the climate COPs with the country delegations, supporting them in their negotiation processes and also organizing side events. And because for developing countries, this is the venue where they can talk about climate finance, which is very important. Like you heard from Tom, with financing, there's a lot of technologies out there. But for developing countries, where is the money coming from, right? Many of these countries were historically colonized, right? They haven't had the chance to industrialize, but now they are being asked to reduce their greenhouse gas emission and move from fossil fuel to renewable energy. That needs a massive infusion of funds. So one of the issues that's going to be discussed in Belém is about climate finance, both from private and public sector. And because we are talking about green economy, I also wanted to introduce the definition of green economy from one of the UN agencies, International Labour Organization. So ILO defines it as greening the economy in a way that's fair, that's inclusive, as inclusive as possible for everyone concerned, creating decent work opportunities and leaving no one behind. This is really important on the SDGs, which also Tom introduced, like when he was talking about life on land and below water, sustainable development goals. And we are working on the sustainable UN and with the countries and UNOC. Dave, as the president, we are advocating for the sustainable development goals, and a major principle is no one left behind. So we are not talking about incremental improvement in poverty. We are not talking about poverty reduction, but we are talking about poverty eradication. So, right? Yeah. So this is really important to talk about, and that's why I wanted to also introduce the concept of just transition, because without just transition, developing countries will be leaving behind, right? We're going to be leaving them behind. So it's really important to have an idea of what we are asking about from developing countries. So, yeah. So because a lot of the poorest countries are least able to cope with climate change, and to making sure that the financing is available, the technology are available. So UN agencies like the United Nations Development Program, where I worked for over 15 years, we were doing that, supporting countries to apply for funding sources like the Green Climate Fund and other sources, global environmental facilities, so that they can take advantage of the technologies that are coming abroad. And I noticed in Tom's presentation about the Montreal Protocol, that's a really positive example, right? But when people notice the green ozone hole, right? It was like a stark reminder of how serious the challenge is. And countries did get together. And while I was working in Vietnam, we were working on introducing refrigerator that do not use those ozone ODS, ozone depleting substances, and introducing HCFC and more modern technologies which are not causing the ozone depletion. So those technologies are there, but we need funds for the people in all over the world who want to have the same living standards that we enjoy in the West, and to have the refrigeration, to have the air conditioning in the extreme summer. But that means we need to provide them with this technology and the funds to be so that they can avail themselves of these technologies. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of conclude with a couple of slides about how we kind of, these are kind of some of the grim realities, but these are also important that we stay positive in terms of, as a couple of terms I like are like being climate curious, right? Because sometimes when you hear about climate change and impacts and sea level rise, it just, people just kind of glaze over like, okay, this is beyond my control, or, this is something, what can I do about this? So we stay climate curious, we stay climate positive, and also to be mindful that progress does not always happen linearly, right? So there are, faltering, and then we can kind of move forward. This is especially true for the UN agencies right now in the current environment when the financing is being cut down. And we are also seeing more and more action from the private sector. So this is an example of Deloitte, where the employees are asking for more climate action. And this data kind of shows that like 2/3 of the employees believe that their employers are falling short. So they are asking for additional action to integrate sustainability in the core strategy of their organization. We all know about Patagonia, Microsoft, who have already embraced this kind of shift. And while the US moved away from the Paris goals, philanthropics like Bloomberg pledged $500 million to this cause to put into renewable energy empowering cities and states to act as leaders. So we are seeing that a lot as well, right? When if it's a federal level, the commitment goes down, cities are taking on a responsibility. So this is kind of a positive trend. How local action can also impact the global results. And I think one other point I wanted to share, looking into the youth, is the legal aspects of climate change. It's not just a scientific and political issue. It's more and more becoming a legal issues and So we are saying a new era in climate law where nations, corporations, and individuals are being held accountable by law. And as you can see, about 3,700 lawsuits were against governments, companies, as well in individuals, major polluters. And you may be aware, like there were in the US, youth-led climate suits that have been happening. And people, I think someone in the previous panel talked about this, the intergenerational equity aspect, right? The current level of standard of living that we are used to, that's not going to be, if we are not taking climate action, our future generations will not have that same life, being able to go out in the, middle of the day. It's, the temperature increase, in parts of Northern Africa, it goes 130 degrees in the middle of the day. I talk to my students about this Hollywood movie Doom, right? When you see how hot it gets, and that's not too far ahead of us, right? Some countries in Northern Africa and Middle East are already suffering from this. So we do not want to leave our future generation in a world that is not livable. And that's why I think it's great to see that the youth are becoming active and demanding their constitutional right to a safe and a safe climate and a future. Okay, I think this is sorry, I did not. So that was my slide about the legal impacts. All right. So climate suits are happening. And so that's the last one about communicating climate change. So it's really important to connect the dots about climate change. Again, not to make sure that we are not kind of talking about gloom and doom all the time, but making sure, like if it's just one speech for all, which was happening early on in my career, we are talking about climate change, sea level rise, species extinction, things like that. But now it's important to talk about tailoring our messages according to the audience. And if you are talking to the indigenous populations, you have to talk in the, terms that make sense. Maybe use indigenous languages and learn from how indigenous populations live with nature, right? And this is not something to fight with nature. In the private sector, it is more monetary terms that Tom pointed out. And it's not just a scientific issue, it's a socio-economic issue, right? So and that's when you can reach people when you talk about green jobs in the renewable industry and other aspects, that this is actually something that's a positive. This can be turned into an opportunity with investment in renewables. And also for the messaging of climate change, one other point is co-creating messages. Depending on the audience, create messages that make sense, get rid of the jargon. I mean, it's sometimes, we use so many acronyms when we are talking about climate change, right? But it's not really, important to sound smart, but actually be smart so that people understand what is happening and how we can make changes in our daily lives. How can we impact policy changes through voting and, taking public action. So I think that's kind of, the last point, almost there.
Okay.
Last point I want to make is also, we don't all have to become climate experts, right? There are resources like from the UN, there's climate dictionary. There are, to kind of combat fake news, there are resources like Verified, where you can actually fact check information on climate change. So to make sure you are giving the right information and not be subjected to greenwashing. That's another term when we're claiming to take climate action, but actually not. So, the point is there's a lot going on, but we need to become knowledgeable and use the tools at our hand. I'm going to stop there.